Today I'm telling you a story that looks like romance but smells like mystery. There's a charming town, sunlight pouring through stained glass, important people smiling out of convenience, and a past that refuses to stay buried. Because when someone disappears without a trace, it's not always because love ran out. Sometimes it's fear, and fear, darling, leaves clues, even when you try to erase them. The late afternoon light filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Edmund's Chapel, casting pools of amber and crimson across the worn stone floor. Violet Harrington stood on a wooden scaffold, her fingers tracing the delicate lead lines of a 13th-century rose window. Even damaged and dulled by centuries of neglect, the craftsmanship took her breath away. "Careful up there," called Mrs. Pemberton, the chapel's elderly custodian, from below. "Those boards haven't been replaced in decades." Violet smiled down at her, adjusting the magnifying loop around her neck. "I've worked on scaffolds much older than this one, I promise." She'd arrived in the city only 2 days ago, her heart hammering with each familiar street corner she'd passed. 3 years. 3 years since she'd fled this place, since she'd walked away from everything she'd ever loved. The city looked the same. The River Avon still wound its silver path through the valley, the medieval bridges still arched gracefully over the water, and the cathedral spires still pierced the sky like prayers made stone. But Violet was different now. She had to be. Her chestnut brown hair, so different from the vibrant copper she'd once worn, was twisted into a practical bun at the nape of her neck. She'd dressed simply in dark trousers and a cream-colored blouse, clothing that helped her blend into the background. Invisible. Safe. That's what she needed to be. "The restoration will take at least 4 months, Violet had told the chapel board during her interview via video call. "These windows are in worse condition than the photographs suggested, but I can save them. Every single one." They'd hired her immediately. The salary wasn't generous, but it would cover rent for the small flat she'd found on the outskirts of the city, and keep food on the table for her and— "Mummy!" The chapel door swung open, and a small figure barreled inside, his dark curls bouncing with each enthusiastic step. Violet's heart swelled as it always did when she saw him. Thomas, her son, her entire world. At 2.5 years old, he was a force of pure joy, with eyes the color of storm clouds and a smile that could light up the darkest room. If this story is touching your heart, show your support, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. Every action helps us keep bringing you new stories full of emotion. "Mrs. Fletcher, I'm so sorry," Violet called down to her landlady, who appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath. "I told him to wait outside." "Nonsense, dear," Mrs. Fletcher replied, her round face kind. "The little one wanted to see where his mummy works. Can't fault him for that." Violet climbed down from the scaffold, her movements careful and practiced. The moment her feet touched the ground, Thomas launched himself into her arms, his small hands clutching her blouse. "Up high!" he exclaimed, pointing at the scaffold. "You were up so high, Mummy." "I was," she agreed, kissing the top of his head. He smelled like the biscuits Mrs. Fletcher always kept in her kitchen. "And one day, when you're much bigger, I'll teach you all about the windows. Would you like that?" Thomas nodded vigorously, then wiggled to be put down. He immediately toddled toward the colored light pooling on the floor, laughing as he stepped from red to blue to gold. "He's the image of his father," Mrs. Pemberton observed quietly, watching the boy play. Violet's breath caught. She forced her expression to remain neutral. "People say that. Will the father be joining you here in the city?" "No." The word came out sharper than intended. Violet softened her tone. "No, we're not together." It wasn't a lie. They weren't together. But the truth was so much more complicated, tangled in threats and secrets and a love that still made her chest ache when she allowed herself to remember. She'd loved him with every fiber of her being. Ethan Holloway, heir to Holloway Industries, one of the oldest and most respected manufacturing firms in England. But to her, he'd never been the businessman, the heir, the public figure. He'd been the man who'd brought her coffee while she worked late in the cathedral's restoration studio, the man who'd listened to her talk about pigments and glass techniques with genuine fascination, the man whose rare smiles had felt like gifts, meant only for her, and she'd left him without a word, without an explanation, because someone had made it very clear that staying would put her parents in danger. "Mummy, what's that?" Thomas pointed at a carved stone angel in the corner, its features worn smooth by time. Violet knelt beside him, grateful for the distraction. "That's an angel, sweetheart. See its wings?" As she explained the sculpture to her son, she didn't notice the sleek black car that had pulled up outside the chapel. Didn't see the tall figure that emerged, his tailored suit doing nothing to soften the sharp lines of his posture. Didn't feel the weight of the gaze that found her through the chapel's open door. Ethan Holloway had been on his way to a business dinner when he'd driven past St. Edmund's Chapel. He'd meant to keep going. He'd driven past this chapel hundreds of times in the past 3 years without stopping. But today, something made him glance through the doorway, and his entire world stopped. The woman kneeling on the chapel floor had darker hair than he remembered. Her clothes were different, her posture more guarded, but he would know the curve of her spine anywhere, would recognize the graceful movement of her hands even in complete darkness. He'd memorized every inch of her during the year they'd spent together, and time had done nothing to erase that knowledge. Violet, his Violet, the woman who'd vanished without a trace. The woman he'd searched for until his resources and hope had finally run dry. The woman he'd forced himself to stop loving, though he'd never quite succeeded. And beside her, a child. A small boy with dark curls and a laugh that carried through the evening air. Ethan's hands clenched into fists at his sides. His heart pounded so hard, he thought it might break through his ribs. 3 years of unanswered questions. 3 years of grief and rage, and a hollow ache that nothing could fill. She was here, she was alive, and she had a child. He stepped through the chapel doorway, his shadow falling across the colored light where the boy played. Violet looked up. Their eyes met, and the world held its breath. For a moment, Violet couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but stare at the man who'd haunted her dreams for 3 endless years. Ethan Holloway looked exactly as she remembered, and yet completely different. He'd always been handsome, with strong features and dark hair that never quite stayed perfectly combed, but now there was something harder about him, something that hadn't been there before. Lines bracketed his mouth that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. His grey eyes, once warm when they'd looked at her, were now cold as winter steel. Violet. Her name was barely a whisper, but it cut through the chapel's silence like a blade. Mrs. Pemberton glanced between them, her expression curious. Mrs. Fletcher took Thomas's hand protectively, sensing the tension that suddenly filled the sacred space. "I don't—" Violet's voice cracked. She cleared her throat, stood on shaking legs. "I think you've mistaken me for someone else." It was a pathetic attempt, and they both knew it. Ethan's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. He took another step closer, and she could smell his cologne, the same one he'd always worn, cedar, and something crisp that reminded her of autumn mornings. "Don't." The single word carried a warning. "Don't insult my intelligence, Violet. I'd know you anywhere." Her heart was a wild thing in her chest, throwing itself against her ribs. 3 years ago, she'd imagined this moment 1,000 times. She'd pictured him finding her, pictured the reunion, the explanations, the forgiveness. But in her imaginings, she'd always been able to tell him the truth. She'd never factored in the fear that still lived in her bones, the terror that whoever had threatened her family might still be watching. "Mummy!" Thomas tugged at her trousers, his small face scrunched with confusion. "Who's that man?" Ethan's gaze dropped to the child, and Violet watched something crack in his expression. He stared at Thomas with an intensity that made her want to scoop her son into her arms and run. But she couldn't run. Not again. "How old is he?" Ethan's voice was rough, barely controlled. "I really think we should—" Mrs. Fletcher began, but Violet cut her off. "Mrs. Fletcher, would you mind taking Thomas back to the flat? I'll be there shortly." "Are you certain, dear?" Violet nodded, not trusting her voice. She kissed Thomas's forehead, forcing herself to smile, even as her world crumbled around her. "Go with Mrs. Fletcher, sweetheart. Mummy needs to talk to this gentleman." "Okay, Mummy." Thomas hugged her leg, then happily took Mrs. Fletcher's hand. As they left, he waved at Ethan. "Bye-bye, tall man." The chapel door closed behind them with a soft thud that sounded like a death knell. Mrs. Pemberton cleared her throat. "I'll just be in the sacristy if you need anything, dear." Then they were alone. Ethan stood 5 feet away, but the distance might as well have been an ocean. His hands were shoved deep in his pockets, and she recognized the gesture. It was what he did when he was trying very hard to control himself. 3 years, he said finally. 3 years, Violet. I searched for you. I hired investigators. I contacted every hospital, every police station in 3 countries. Your parents told me they didn't know where you'd gone. Your friends claimed ignorance. You just vanished." The pain in his voice made her eyes sting with tears. She blinked them back furiously. "I'm sorry." "You're sorry." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I thought you were dead. I thought someone had taken you, hurt you. I thought—" He broke off, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration she remembered all too well. "And then months passed and I realized you'd left by choice. That you'd chosen to leave me." "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides, and suddenly he was there, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his grey eyes, could count the days of stubble on his jaw. "Explain it to me, Violet. Make me understand how the woman who told me she loved me could disappear without a trace." She wanted to tell him everything. Wanted to pour out the truth about the threatening letter, about the fear that had driven her away, about the loneliness of the past 3 years. But the words stuck in her throat. What if the threat was still real? What if telling him put him in danger too? "I can't," she whispered. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "Can't or won't? Does it matter?" "It matters to me." His voice dropped lower, intimate in a way that made her shiver. "That matters because I've spent 3 years trying to forget you, 3 years trying to move on with my life, and in 30 seconds, you've destroyed every bit of progress I've made." Violet's breath hitched. She remembered this, the way he could strip away her defenses with just his voice, just his presence. She remembered lazy Sunday mornings in his flat, his arms around her while rain pattered against the windows. She remembered the way he'd looked at her the last time she'd seen him, like she was the answer to every question he'd never known to ask. And she remembered the terror she'd felt when she'd read that letter, when she'd seen the photos of her parents' crumpled car, when she'd understood that loving Ethan Holloway came with a price she couldn't afford to pay. "The boy," Ethan said, and she flinched at the deliberate distance in his tone. "How old is he?" Violet wrapped her arms around herself. 2.5. She watched him do the math, watched understanding dawn in his eyes, watched fury and something that looked like anguish war across his features. "Is he mine?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy as stone. Violet knew she should lie, should tell him Thomas was someone else's child, should push him away and protect the fragile peace she'd tried to build, but she'd never been good at lying to him. "Yes," she breathed. "He's yours." Ethan staggered back as if she'd struck him. His hand gripped the edge of a nearby pew, knuckles white with the force of his grip. When he looked at her again, the raw emotion in his eyes nearly brought her to her knees. "I have a son," he said hoarsely. "For 2.5 years I've had a son and you didn't tell me." "I couldn't. You couldn't." His laugh was bitter. "What else couldn't you do, Violet? Couldn't send a letter, couldn't make a phone call, couldn't give me any indication that you were alive?" "Please," she whispered, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "Please try to understand." "Understand what?" He was in front of her again, his presence overwhelming. "Understand that you took my child and disappeared? Understand that I've missed 2.5 years of his life? Help me understand that, Violet. Please." She couldn't answer, couldn't explain without telling him everything, and she still didn't know if the danger had passed. The threat had been clear. Leave or her parents would pay the price. There'd been no expiration date on that ultimatum. Ethan stared at her for a long moment, his chest heaving with emotion. Then he stepped back, his expression shuddering. "I'm not done with this," he said quietly. "I'm not done with you. We're going to talk, really talk, and you're going to tell me everything." "Ethan, I have a business dinner I'm already late for," he continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "But I'll be back tomorrow, and Violet—" He paused at the door, his profile sharp against the fading light. "Don't even think about running again, because I promise you, this time I'll follow you to the ends of the earth." Then he was gone, leaving Violet alone in the chapel with her tears and her secrets, and the terrible, wonderful knowledge that Ethan Holloway still cared enough to be furious with her. Ethan sat in his car outside the upscale restaurant where his business dinner was being held, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles ached. He couldn't go inside. Not like this. Not when his entire world had just been turned upside down. Violet was alive. Violet was here. And he had a son. A son. The word echoed in his mind, bringing with it a rush of emotions he couldn't begin to process. Fury at her deception, anguish at all he'd missed. But underneath it all, something else. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Where are you?" The Caldwells are waiting. Right, the Caldwells. Specifically, Ruby Caldwell, the woman he'd been dating, if you could call it that, for the past 18 months. Ruby, who'd been patient with his emotional distance. Ruby, who everyone assumed he'd eventually marry because it made sense. Two powerful families joining forces. A practical arrangement. He'd never loved Ruby, had never even pretended to. She knew it. Her mother, Margaret Caldwell, knew it. Hell, everyone knew it. But Ruby seemed content with the arrangement, and his mother had been so desperate to see him happy after Violet's disappearance that he'd stopped fighting it. But now Ethan pulled out his phone and dialed his assistant. Michael, cancel my dinner reservation. Something's come up. Sir, Mrs. Holloway specifically said, I don't care what my mother said. Cancel it. And clear my schedule for tomorrow morning. He ended the call before Michael could respond, then sat in the darkening car, his mind racing. He needed to think, needed to plan. But all he could see was Violet's face, older and somehow more beautiful than he remembered. Tears streaming down her cheeks as she'd confirmed what his heart had already known. The boy was his. Thomas. His son was named Thomas. Ethan leaned his head back against the seat, closing his eyes. He remembered the last time he'd seen Violet before she'd disappeared. They'd spent the weekend at his cottage in the Cotswolds. She'd laughed as they'd walked through a meadow, the summer sun turning her copper hair to flame. That night, they'd made love while rain drummed against the windows, and he'd known with absolute certainty, that she was the one, the only one. A week later, she was gone. His phone rang. His mother. He considered not answering, but Adelaide Holloway wasn't the type to give up easily. Where are you? She demanded without preamble. The Caldwells are here, and Ruby is asking for you. Tell them I had an emergency. What kind of emergency? Ethan hesitated. His mother had been devastated when Violet disappeared. She'd adored her, had already been planning their wedding in her mind. Breaking the news about Violet's return over the phone felt wrong. I'll explain tomorrow, he said finally. I need to go. Ethan James Holloway, you can't just... He ended the call and turned off his phone. Then he started the car and drove, not toward home, but back toward St. Edmund's Chapel. Violet sat on the worn sofa in her small flat, watching Thomas sleep in the playpen Mrs. Fletcher had loaned her. The boy had fought sleep for an hour, his excitement over seeing the chapel too much for his little mind to settle. But finally, exhaustion had won. She should sleep too. Tomorrow would bring more work at the chapel, more questions she couldn't answer. But sleep felt impossible when her entire world had just collapsed. Ethan knew. The man she'd loved with every fiber of her being, the man she'd thought about every single day for 3 years, knew she was here, knew about Thomas. And he was angry, rightfully so. She'd seen it in every line of his body, heard it in every word he'd spoken. She pulled out her phone, her finger hovering over her mother's number. Susan Harrington answered on the second ring. Violet, is everything all right? He found me, Mum. Violet's voice broke. Ethan found me. Silence, then a sharp intake of breath. How? He saw me at the chapel. I didn't even know he was there until... She pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to hold back a sob. He knows about Thomas. Oh, sweetheart. I don't know what to do. The letter, the threats. What if they were serious? What if telling him puts you and Dad in danger? Her mother sighed. Violet, your father and I have talked about this. We think perhaps it's time to consider that the threat may no longer be active. 3 years is a long time. Or whoever sent it is just waiting for me to make a mistake. Then we go to the police, show them the letter. But darling, you can't keep living like this. And that little boy deserves to know his father. Violet looked at Thomas, at the way his dark curls fell across his forehead just like Ethan's did. I'm scared, Mum. I know, but you're also brave. You've been brave for 3 years. Maybe it's time to be brave in a different way. After they hung up, Violet sat in the darkness, her mother's words echoing in her mind. She thought about the letter she'd received 3 years ago. The one she'd read so many times the paper had grown soft at the creases. She'd kept it, hidden in a box at her parents' house, along with the fake documents and the newspaper clipping about the accident. She'd never shown it to the police. The letter had been clear, go to the authorities, and her parents would pay. So she disappeared instead, following the instructions like a puppet on strings. But maybe her mother was right. Maybe 3 years was long enough. A knock at the door made her jump. She glanced at the clock, nearly 9. Who would be visiting this late? She peered through the peephole, and her heart stopped. Ethan stood in the hallway, still wearing his suit, looking exhausted and determined in equal measure. Violet's hand trembled as she unlocked the door. "What are you doing here?" "I couldn't stay away." His voice was rough, worn thin by emotion. "I tried. I got halfway to the restaurant and I couldn't." They stared at each other across the threshold. Violet was acutely aware of how small her flat was, how shabby it must look compared to the luxury he was accustomed to. She was wearing old jeans and a sweater with a hole in the elbow, her hair falling loose around her shoulders. She'd never felt more vulnerable. "Can I come in?" Ethan asked quietly. "Please." Violet stepped aside and he entered, his presence seeming to fill the tiny space. His eyes went immediately to Thomas, sleeping peacefully in the playpen. "Can I—" He swallowed hard. "Can I see him? Up close?" Violet nodded, unable to speak. She watched as Ethan crossed the room with careful steps, as if approaching something precious and fragile. He knelt beside the playpen, his large frame incongruous next to the small space. For a long moment, he simply looked at their son. Violet saw his throat work, saw his hand reach out and then pull back as if he didn't trust himself to touch. "He looks like you," she whispered. "He has your nose." Ethan's voice was thick. "And your mouth." Thomas stirred, making a small sound in his sleep. Ethan froze, but the boy didn't wake. When Ethan finally stood and turned to face her, there were tears on his cheeks. "I've missed so much," he said. His birth, his first steps, his first words. "I can't get any of that back." "I know." Violet's own tears fell freely now. "I'm so sorry, Ethan, I'm so sorry." "Then tell me why." He closed the distance between them, his hands gripping her shoulders gently but firmly. "Tell me why you left. Tell me why you kept my son from me. Tell me everything, Violet, no more secrets." She looked up into his eyes and saw the man she'd fallen in love with, the man she'd never stopped loving, and she knew her mother was right. It was time to be brave in a different way. "All right," she breathed. "I'll tell you everything." Violet made tea with shaking hands, needing something to do while she gathered her courage. Ethan sat at her small kitchen table, his tall frame awkward in the cramped space, his eyes never leaving her. "2 days before I left," she began, setting a chipped mug in front of him. "My parents had a car accident." Ethan's brow furrowed. "I remember. Your mother called me from the hospital. She said they were fine, just shaken up." They were fine, physically. Violet wrapped her hands around her own mug, grateful for the warmth. But the next day, I received a letter. No return address, no signature, just instructions. She could see the letter in her mind as clearly as if it were in front of her now. Block letters cut from magazines, like something from a thriller film. It would have been laughable if it hadn't been so terrifying. What kind of instructions? To leave. Immediately. To disappear and never contact anyone from my old life again. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. The letter said the accident was a warning, that if I didn't do exactly as they said, the next time my parents wouldn't be so lucky. Ethan's mug hit the table with a sharp crack. "Someone threatened your parents. They included photographs of the car accident, of my parents' house, of my flat." Violet's hands trembled so badly she had to set down her tea. "And they provided documents. Fake identity papers, a bank account in another name. Everything I'd need to disappear." "My God!" Ethan's face had gone pale. "And you never went to the police?" "The letter said if I contacted the authorities they'd know, that they were watching." She looked at him, willing him to understand. "Ethan, I was terrified. These people knew where my parents lived. They'd caused one accident already. What if they—" "So you just left?" His voice was flat, carefully controlled. "You left without telling me, without giving me a chance to protect you." "I thought about telling you. I almost did, 100 times. But the letter was specific. No contact with anyone from my previous life. And I couldn't risk it. I couldn't risk them hurting my parents because I'd been selfish enough to want comfort from you." Ethan stood abruptly, pacing the small kitchen in 3 long strides. She could see him processing, his brilliant mind working through the implications. "Do you still have the letter?" "My parents do. I didn't dare keep it with me in case—" She broke off. In case what? In case whoever sent it found her. The fear sounded almost paranoid now, but it had been so real 3 years ago. "I need to see it." Ethan's tone left no room for argument. And then we're going to the police. What if the threat is still real? He turned to face her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. Then I'll deal with it. I have resources, Violet. Security. I should have had them 3 years ago, and I've spent every day since you left regretting that I didn't insist on protecting you better. This isn't your fault, isn't it? He laughed bitterly. Someone obviously thought they'd benefit from getting you out of my life. Someone who knew enough about us to know that threatening your parents would make you run. Someone who... He stopped, his expression shifting. Someone who wanted you gone. Violet watched understanding dawn across his features. Ruby, he breathed. Ruby? Ruby Caldwell. The woman I've been... He trailed off, running a hand through his hair in frustration. We started dating about 18 months ago. Her mother, Margaret, had been pushing for it since I disappeared, Violet finished quietly. The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. Ruby Caldwell, daughter of one of the wealthiest families in the region. Margaret Caldwell, known for her ruthless business tactics and social maneuvering. A woman who'd reportedly been trying to arrange a marriage between Ethan and her daughter for years. I need to think about this, Ethan said, his voice tight. I need to figure out how to prove it, how to... He looked at Thomas, still sleeping peacefully, then back at Violet. But first, I need to ask you something. What? The baby. Thomas, when did you find out you were pregnant? Violet's throat tightened. About a month after I left. I'd been feeling ill and I thought it was just stress. But then I took a test and... She remembered the moment vividly, standing in a pharmacy bathroom in a town whose name she couldn't even remember, staring at the positive result with a mixture of joy and terror. I almost called you right then, almost broke every rule in that letter because I was so scared and so happy and I needed you so desperately. Why didn't you? Because the next day, I read in the newspaper that my parents' house had been broken into. Nothing was taken, but the police said someone had gone through my old room. She met his eyes. They were still watching, Ethan, making sure I stayed away. He closed his eyes, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping. When he opened them again, the rage she saw there was frightening in its intensity. I'm going to find out who did this, he said, his voice deadly calm. And when I do, they're going to regret the day they ever thought to threaten anyone I love. The word love hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Violet's heart hammered. Ethan, I know what you're going to say, he interrupted. That it's been 3 years. That things have changed. That we're different people now. He moved closer, and suddenly he was right there, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body. But here's what I know, Violet. I've spent 3 years trying to forget you, trying to move on, and I failed spectacularly, because no matter how much time passes, no matter what I do or who I'm with, you're still the only woman I've ever loved. Her breath caught. You're with Ruby. No. The word was sharp, definitive. I'm in a relationship of convenience with Ruby, one that's going to end the moment I can speak to her, because whatever we had, and it wasn't much, it's over now. You can't just... I can. I will. He reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek with a tenderness that made her want to weep. I've wasted 3 years, because someone decided to play God with our lives. I'm not wasting another day. Violet leaned into his touch despite herself, starved for the connection she'd denied herself for so long. But reality intruded, sharp and unwelcome. What if they come after us again? What if telling the truth puts Thomas in danger? Then I'll hire a security team. I'll move you both into my house where you'll be protected around the clock. I'll do whatever it takes. His thumb traced her jawline. But I'm not losing you again, Violet, and I'm not missing another moment of my son's life. The determination in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like coming home. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered. I've been running for so long I don't know how to stop. Then let me teach you. His forehead rested against hers, their breaths mingling. Let me protect you the way I should have done 3 years ago. Let me be the father Thomas deserves. Let me... His voice cracked. Let me love you again. Violet's tears fell freely now, but for the first time in 3 years, they weren't tears of fear or loneliness. They were tears of hope. Okay, she breathed. Okay. Ethan left Violet's flat near midnight, though everything in him wanted to stay. He'd sat on her sofa for hours, just watching Thomas sleep, occasionally asking Violet questions about their son. What were his favorite foods? Did he sleep through the night? Had he said his first word yet? Each answer was a knife to the heart, a reminder of everything he'd missed. But beneath the pain was something else. Something that felt dangerously like joy. He had a son. A beautiful, healthy son with Violet's smile and his own dark curls. And Violet, his Violet, had never stopped loving him. He'd seen it in her eyes when she'd looked at him, heard it in the tremor of her voice when she'd agreed to let him back into her life. Now, as he drove through the quiet streets toward his house on the outskirts of the city, reality began to intrude. He had responsibilities to handle, conversations that couldn't wait. The first call he made was to his head of security, waking the man from sleep. "Marcus, I need a team on a residential address immediately," Ethan said without preamble. "Full surveillance, rotating shifts. I want to know if anyone so much as looks at the building sideways." He rattled off Violet's address, then continued. "I also need you to pull any surveillance footage you can find from 3 years ago, specifically anything around the Harrington residence and St. Catherine's Cathedral. I'm looking for evidence of stalking, threats, or harassment. Sir, what's this about? I'll explain tomorrow, just get it done." The second call was harder. He dialed his mother's number, knowing she'd still be awake. Adelaide Holloway rarely slept before 1 in the morning. "Ethan." Her voice was cool. "I assume you have an explanation for abandoning the Caldwells tonight?" "I do, but not over the phone. I'm coming over. It's nearly midnight." "I know what time it is, Mother." "I'll be there in 10 minutes. He hung up before she could argue. The Holloway family estate sat on 20 acres of manicured grounds, the Georgian manor house lit up against the night sky like a beacon. Ethan had grown up here, had learned to ride horses in the stables, and swum in the indoor pool on rainy days. But it had never felt like home the way Violet's tiny, shabby flat had felt tonight. His mother was waiting in the drawing room, a glass of wine in her hand, her silver hair perfectly coiffed despite the late hour. At 63, Adelaide Holloway was still a formidable presence, her posture military straight, her blue eyes sharp as glass. "Well?" she demanded as Ethan entered. "What emergency was so important that you had to humiliate Ruby in front of half the city's elite?" "Violet is back." The wine glass froze halfway to his mother's lips. "What?" "I saw her today, at St. Edmund's Chapel. She's here, Mother, she's alive, and she's working as a restorer on the chapel project." Adelaide set down her glass with trembling hands. "Are you certain? Could it have been someone who looked like her?" "I'm certain." Ethan crossed to the sideboard and poured himself a whiskey, needing something stronger than wine. "I spoke to her. And there's more." His mother waited, her face pale. "I have a son, Thomas. He's 2.5 years old." The color drained completely from Adelaide's face. She sank into the nearest chair, one hand pressed to her chest. For a moment, Ethan worried she might faint. "A grandson," she whispered. "You have a son?" "Yes." "And she kept him from you? For more than 2 years?" Ethan heard the anger creeping into his mother's voice and held up a hand. "She had her reasons. Good ones. Someone threatened her, Mother. Threatened her parents. Forced her to disappear." Adelaide's expression sharpened. "Who?" "I have suspicions, but I need proof before I make accusations." His mother studied him for a long moment, her brilliant mind clearly working through the implications. "The Caldwells." It wasn't a question. Ethan nodded slowly. "Margaret has always been ambitious," Adelaide continued, her voice hard. "And Ruby has been in love with you since you were teenagers. But this, threatening an innocent woman, separating a father from his child, this is monstrous." "I know. And when I can prove it, I'm going to make sure they pay for what they did." "What do you need from me?" The question surprised him. His mother had been pushing the relationship with Ruby for months, seeing it as a smart business alliance. He'd expected resistance, arguments, perhaps even accusations that he was being foolish. Instead, she looked at him with an expression he recognized from his childhood, fierce maternal protection. "I need you to help me end things with Ruby as cleanly as possible," he said, "and I need you to help me bring Violet and Thomas into our lives in a way that protects them from any backlash." Adelaide stood, crossing to where he stood and taking his hand. "Your father would have loved a grandson," she said softly. "He always said you'd make a wonderful father someday." Ethan's throat tightened. His father had died 5 years ago, and the grief was still sharp sometimes. "I wish he could have met Thomas." "So do I." Adelaide squeezed his hand. "But he'd be proud of you, Ethan, for doing the right thing, even if it's difficult, for fighting for the woman you love. I never stopped loving her, Mother. Not for a single day. I know, darling. I've always known. She smiled sadly. Ruby is a lovely girl, but she's not Violet. No one could be Violet for you. They talked for another hour, planning their strategy. Adelaide would speak to her contacts, quietly gather information about the Caldwells' activities 3 years ago. Ethan would meet with Ruby tomorrow and end their relationship, making it clear that there would be no reconciliation. It was nearly 2 in the morning when Ethan finally left, exhaustion pulling at his bones. But as he drove home, his phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Violet. "Thank you for understanding, for listening, for still caring. Thomas woke up asking about the tall man. I think he liked you." Ethan's chest tightened with emotion. He pulled over to the side of the road, his hands shaking as he typed his response. "I liked him too. More than I can put into words. Can I see you both tomorrow? I want to start making up for lost time." Her response came quickly. "Yes. Come to the chapel around 10. Thomas will be with me." Ethan stared at the message, then added, "I'm going to fix this, Violet. I'm going to make sure you're both safe. I promise." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "I believe you. Sleep well, Ethan." He sat in his car for a long moment, his heart full of things he couldn't name. Fear, yes. Anger at what had been stolen from them. But underneath it all, something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. His phone buzzed again, but this time it was a call. Ruby's name flashed on the screen. Ethan took a deep breath and answered. "Ruby, where were you tonight?" Her voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing it was to be stood up in front of everyone?" "I'm sorry, something came up. Something more important than our relationship?" He closed his eyes. There was no easy way to do this. "Ruby, we need to talk, but not over the phone. Can you meet me for lunch tomorrow?" Silence. Then in a voice that sent chills down his spine, "This is about her, isn't it? About that woman who abandoned you." Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. "How did you know about that?" "Your mother talks, Ethan. Everyone knows you were heartbroken when your precious Violet disappeared." Her laugh was bitter. "Well, she's gone. She left you. And I'm here. I've always been here." "Ruby, lunch tomorrow. 1 o'clock at the riverside." She hung up before he could respond. Ethan stared at his phone, a cold knot forming in his stomach. Ruby's reaction was wrong somehow, too knowing, too angry about someone she'd never met. He thought about the threatening letter, about the timing of Ruby's interest in him, about Margaret Caldwell's sudden friendship with his mother right around the time Violet had disappeared. Tomorrow, he decided, he'd get answers, one way or another. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, he'd sleep knowing that the woman he loved was safe, that his son existed, and that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. Violet watched from the chapel scaffold as Ethan's sleek car pulled up outside precisely at 10 o'clock. Her heart did a complicated flutter in her chest, the same feeling she used to get when she'd see him across a crowded room back when her life had been simpler. Thomas was playing on a blanket below, building towers with wooden blocks that Mrs. Pemberton had found in the chapel's storage room. He looked up at the sound of the car door closing, his small face scrunching in concentration as he tried to remember where he'd seen the tall man before. Then Ethan appeared in the doorway, and Violet's breath caught. He'd dressed more casually today, dark jeans and a navy sweater that made his eyes look almost blue in the morning light. He carried a large shopping bag, and his expression was a mixture of nervousness and determination that made him look younger, more like the man she remembered. "Morning," he said, his eyes finding hers on the scaffold. "Is it all right if I come in?" "Of course." Violet climbed down carefully, her hands suddenly clumsy on the ladder rungs. "Thomas, do you remember Mr. Holloway?" Thomas looked up from his blocks, studying Ethan with the serious expression children get when they're trying to decide if someone is friend or foe. Then, to Violet's surprise, he smiled. "Tall man," he announced proudly, clearly pleased with himself for remembering. Ethan's face transformed with a smile so genuine, so full of wonder, that Violet had to look away before she started crying. He crouched down to Thomas's level, making himself less imposing. "That's right. I'm the tall man." He held out his hand solemnly. "It's nice to meet you properly, Thomas." Thomas stared at the offered hand, confused. Then he giggled and slapped it with his tiny palm. "High five. Did I do that wrong?" Ethan looked up at Violet, bemused. "He's two," Violet explained, her voice thick with emotion. "Handshakes are still a bit advanced." "Right. High fives, then." Ethan held out his hand again, and Thomas enthusiastically slapped it, dissolving into giggles. Violet watched them together, her heart aching with a bittersweet mixture of joy and regret. They looked so much alike, the same dark curls, the same strong jawline that would become more pronounced as Thomas grew. Even their mannerisms were similar, the way they both tilted their heads when concentrating. "I brought something," Ethan said, reaching into the shopping bag. "I wasn't sure what 2-year-olds like, so I might have gone a bit overboard." He pulled out a wooden train set, the kind with magnetic connectors and hand-painted details that cost more than Violet's weekly grocery budget. Thomas's eyes went wide. "Train!" he shouted, bouncing on his toes. "Mummy, look, a train!" "I see it, sweetheart." Violet knelt beside them as Ethan opened the box. "That's very generous, Ethan." "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." His eyes met hers, and she saw everything he wasn't saying. "I've missed 2 birthdays, 2 Christmases. Let me try to make up for it. Besides, I used to love trains when I was his age." They spent the next hour on the chapel floor, the 3 of them building an elaborate train track that wound between pews and around stone pillars. Thomas directed their efforts with the confidence of a tiny tyrant, insisting that the bridge needed to go here, not there, and that the red train was faster than the blue one. Ethan proved surprisingly patient with the constant changes, rebuilding sections without complaint. Violet found herself relaxing, laughing at Thomas's running commentary and Ethan's exaggerated sound effects as he drove trains through imaginary tunnels. "You're good with him," she said softly during a moment when Thomas was absorbed in rearranging his train cars. Ethan looked at her, something vulnerable in his expression. "I've spent every night since I found out about him reading parenting books on my phone. I have no idea what I'm doing." "None of us do," Violet assured him. "I've been raising him for 2 years, and half the time I'm just making it up as I go. You've done an incredible job." His voice was serious now, weighted with meaning. "He's happy, healthy, clearly loved. You did that, Violet. All by yourself. I had help. My parents, Mrs. Fletcher. But you were the constant. You were there for every skinned knee, every bad dream, every milestone." He reached out, his hand covering hers where it rested on the stone floor. "I can never thank you enough for that, even though I wish I could have been there too." The touch of his hand sent electricity through her. It had been so long since she'd felt his skin against hers, since she'd allowed herself to want anything beyond survival and safety for Thomas. "Mummy, Daddy, look!" They both froze. Thomas had lined up all the trains in a perfect row and was beaming at them with pride. But it was the word, Daddy, that made time stop. Violet's eyes filled with tears. She hadn't told Thomas who Ethan was, hadn't explained, but somehow in the way children intuitively understand things adults complicate, he'd known. Ethan's hand tightened on hers. When she looked at him, she saw tears streaming down his face, though he was smiling. "That's wonderful, buddy," he managed, his voice rough. "The best train line I've ever seen." Thomas, satisfied with the praise, went back to playing, but Ethan stayed frozen, clearly overwhelmed. "He called me—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "I know." Violet squeezed his hand. I think he's been missing you without even knowing it, like he could sense something was incomplete. Can I—" Ethan swallowed hard. "Can I hug him?" "Of course. You don't need to ask permission. He's your son." Ethan moved slowly, carefully, as if approaching something precious that might shatter. He sat beside Thomas and opened his arms. "Hey, Thomas. Can I have a hug?" Thomas looked up, considered the request with all the seriousness of a business negotiation, then launched himself into Ethan's arms. Ethan caught him, holding him close, his eyes squeezed shut as if he were trying to memorize every detail of the moment. Violet turned away, giving them privacy, but she could hear Ethan whispering to their son, "I love you. I love you so much. I'm so sorry I wasn't here before, but I'm here now. I'm going to be here for everything from now on, I promise." When she finally looked back, Thomas had fallen asleep against Ethan's chest, exhausted from playing. Ethan held him like he was made of glass, one large hand supporting Thomas's head, the other wrapped protectively around his small body. "I have to meet Ruby for lunch," Ethan said quietly, not wanting to wake Thomas. "I'm going to end it. Officially." Ethan, if you need more time, I don't. His eyes were fierce. I never should have started it in the first place. I was trying to fill a void that only you could fill, and it wasn't fair to her or to me. She might not take it well. I don't care. He looked down at Thomas, then back at her. I care about this, about us, about our family. The word family hung in the air between them, fragile and beautiful. Be careful, Violet said. If Ruby or her mother were behind the threats, then I'll deal with it. I'm not afraid of them, Violet. I'm only afraid of losing you and Thomas again. Mrs. Pemberton appeared in the doorway, her timing impeccable as always. Oh, what a sweet sight, she cooed, seeing Thomas asleep in Ethan's arms. Reluctantly, Ethan transferred their son to Violet, his fingers lingering against hers during the handoff. I'll text you after lunch, he promised, and I'll be back later if that's all right. I want to help with bedtime. Violet nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. As Ethan left, she watched him go with a mixture of hope and fear. They were building something fragile and new, but the threats that had torn them apart 3 years ago still loomed, unresolved and dangerous. She just hoped they'd be strong enough to weather whatever storm was coming. The Riverside restaurant was everything Ruby Caldwell loved, exclusive, elegant, and full of people who mattered. She sat at their usual corner table, her cream-colored designer dress perfectly pressed, her blonde hair styled in loose waves that had taken her stylist an hour to achieve. She'd been planning this lunch carefully. After Ethan's odd behavior last night, after his insistence on meeting in person, she knew something was coming. And Ruby Caldwell didn't lose. Not to anyone. Ethan arrived exactly on time, his expression unreadable as he crossed the restaurant. Several heads turned to watch him. He was, after all, one of the most eligible men in the city, even if he was technically taken. Ruby. He kissed her cheek perfunctorily, a social nicety rather than affection. It had always been like that between them. Darling, she smiled, the expression not quite reaching her eyes. You look tired. Rough night. You could say that. Ethan sat across from her, declining the menu the waiter offered. I'll just have coffee, thank you. Ruby ordered a salad she had no intention of eating, then waited until they were alone again. So, are you going to tell me what's really going on? Or should I guess? I think you already know. Ethan's grey eyes were steady on hers. She's back. Violet is back. Ruby's perfectly manicured nails dug into her palm beneath the table. I see. And you saw her where exactly? St. Edmund's Chapel. She's working on the restoration project. He paused, and Ruby saw something shift in his expression, something that made her stomach clench with dread. She has a child. My child. A son named Thomas. The words hit Ruby like a physical blow. She'd known about Violet's return. Her mother's assistant had reported it yesterday, setting off alarm bells. But a child? That complicated everything. How convenient, Ruby said, her voice sharp. She disappears for 3 years, then returns with a child she claims is yours? Really, Ethan, I expected better judgment from you. He is mine. There's no question. Ethan's tone left no room for argument. And I'm ending this, Ruby. Whatever we had, and it wasn't much, it's over. Just like that? Because some woman who abandoned you suddenly reappears. She didn't abandon me. She was threatened, forced to leave. Ethan leaned forward, his intensity palpable. Someone sent her a letter telling her to disappear, or her parents would be hurt. Someone who knew enough about us to know exactly how to manipulate her into running. Ruby felt ice crawl down her spine. He couldn't know. There was no way he could know. That's terrible, she said, infusing her voice with sympathy. But Ethan, think about this rationally. If someone really threatened her, why didn't she go to the police? Why didn't she tell you? Because the threat was credible. Her parents had just been in a car accident, an accident that could have been completely random. Darling, I understand you want to believe her story, but doesn't it seem a bit dramatic, like something from a thriller novel? Ethan's expression hardened. I've seen dramatic enough reactions to suggest it's true, including yours right now. Ruby's heart skipped a beat. I don't know what you mean. Don't you? He studied her carefully, and she felt exposed under that gaze. You knew about Violet before I mentioned her. You said everyone knows I was heartbroken when she disappeared, but we've never discussed her. Not once in 18 months. Your mother mentioned. My mother never discusses Violet with anyone. It's too painful for her. Ethan's voice dropped to something dangerous. So how did you know, Ruby? How did you know her name? Ruby's mind raced. She'd been careless, too emotional to maintain her careful facade. I heard people talking. At the club. You know how gossip spreads. What people? When? I don't remember specifically. Ruby. The way he said her name made her blood run cold. Did you have something to do with Violet's disappearance? That's absurd. She laughed, but it sounded forced even to her own ears. Why would I? Because you wanted me. You've always wanted me, even when we were teenagers. Ethan's eyes never left her face. And suddenly, right after the woman I loved disappeared, your mother became best friends with mine. You started showing up at every event I attended. You made yourself available, sympathetic, patient. You're being paranoid. Am I? He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, then turned it toward her. Then explain this. Ruby's stomach dropped. On the screen was a photograph, grainy but clear enough. It showed her mother's assistant, Helen, entering a print shop 3 years ago. The timestamp on the security footage was 2 days before Violet had disappeared. That's Helen Bennett, your mother's personal assistant, Ethan said quietly. The same woman who resigned rather suddenly last year and moved to Spain. I had my security team track her down yesterday. She was very eager to talk once I offered her immunity and enough money to ensure her comfortable retirement. Ruby's carefully constructed world began to crumble. Whatever she told you, she told me everything. About how your mother ordered her to create a threatening letter. About how she hired someone to cause a minor car accident to make the threat seem real. About how she provided fake documents to help Violet disappear. Ethan's voice was like steel. And she told me that you knew about it, that you encouraged it. Ethan, please, let me explain. What's there to explain? He stood, his chair scraping against the polished floor. Several diners looked over, sensing drama. You and your mother terrorized an innocent woman. You separated me from my child for 2.5 years. You built our entire relationship on a foundation of lies and manipulation. Ruby stood too, desperation clawing at her throat. I did it because I love you. Because we're perfect together, can't you see that? We come from the same world, the same background. We understand each other. You don't love me, Ruby. You love the idea of me. The status, the money, the power. His eyes were hard as granite. And you definitely don't understand me, because if you did, you'd know that the only woman I've ever loved, the only woman I'll ever love, is Violet. She's nobody, Ruby hissed, her composure finally cracking. A common restorer with no family connections, no social standing. She's the mother of my child. She's the woman I'm going to marry. And she's worth 1,000 of you. The words echoed through the suddenly quiet restaurant. Ruby felt tears of rage and humiliation burning her eyes. You'll regret this, she said, her voice shaking. My mother won't let this go. We have influence, Ethan. We can make your life very difficult. Then try. Ethan's smile was cold. But I should warn you. I have documented evidence of what you did. Testimony from Helen. Phone records. Security footage. If you or your mother come anywhere near Violet or my son, I'll destroy you both. Legally, socially, financially. Do you understand? Ruby stared at him, seeing the man she'd wanted for so long. Finally seeing him clearly. He was never going to be hers. He never had been. I understand, she whispered. Good. Ethan dropped several bills on the table. Far more than enough to cover a lunch neither of them had eaten. Stay away from us, Ruby. It's over. He walked out without looking back, leaving Ruby standing alone in the middle of the elegant restaurant, her perfect life shattered around her feet. Violet was cleaning paint from her brushes when her phone rang. Ethan's name flashed on the screen and her heart leaped. Hello? It's done. His voice was tight with emotion. Ruby admitted everything. Well, not willingly, but I had evidence. Her mother's assistant confessed to the whole scheme. Violet sank onto the chapel steps, her legs suddenly weak. It was really them. Yes. Margaret orchestrated it all, the letter, the fake accident, everything. Ruby knew and encouraged it. She heard him take a shaky breath. I'm so sorry, Violet. I'm sorry I didn't protect you better. I'm sorry I didn't see what was happening right under my nose. You couldn't have known. I should have questioned things more. Should have wondered why Ruby's interest in me coincided so perfectly with your disappearance. His voice hardened. But they won't hurt you again. I've made that very clear. Violet closed her eyes, relief washing over her like a wave. 3 years of looking over her shoulder, 3 years of fear, and it was over. What happens now? Now we go to the police with the evidence. Press charges if you want to. My lawyers are already preparing civil suits for emotional distress and the financial impact of forcing you into hiding. He paused. But Violet, that's your choice. If you want to just walk away from this, we can do that too. She thought about her parents, about the fear they'd lived with, about the years stolen from all of them. I want them held accountable. Maybe not criminally. I don't know if I have the strength for a trial. But financially, yes. They should pay for what they did. Then that's what we'll do. She could hear the pride in his voice. I'm coming back to the chapel. I want to see you and Thomas. I want to... He stopped, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. I just want to be with you both. We'll be here. An hour later, Violet heard his car pull up outside. Thomas had been napping, but was awake now, playing with the train set that had quickly become his favorite toy. When Ethan walked through the door, Thomas's face lit up. Daddy! He scrambled to his feet and ran to Ethan, who caught him up in his arms, spinning him around until the boy shrieked with laughter. Violet watched them, her heart so full it ached. This was what she'd imagined during those long, lonely months. Ethan with their son, the two of them bonding, making up for lost time. How's my favorite conductor? Ethan asked, setting Thomas down, but keeping hold of his hand. I made a big track. Thomas tugged him toward the elaborate train setup. Come see. Ethan let himself be led, but his eyes found Violet over their son's head. The look he gave her was intense, full of unspoken promises and desires that made heat bloom in her chest. They spent the afternoon playing trains, then went for a walk along the river. Thomas held both their hands, swinging between them and demanding they lift him high with each step. Normal families did this every day, Violet thought, but for them it was precious and new. Ice cream. Thomas pointed at a vendor near the bridge. Please, Mummy. Please? Violet started to refuse. It was nearly dinner time. But Ethan was already reaching for his wallet. What flavor do you want, buddy? Chocolate and strawberry and... Thomas's eyes went wide at all the options. How about we start with one flavor and see how you do? Violet suggested, laughing. They ended up with chocolate for Thomas, vanilla for Violet, and coffee for Ethan. They sat on a bench overlooking the river, Thomas between them, his face already covered in chocolate. He's going to need a bath, Violet said, trying to wipe his face with a napkin. I have a bathtub, Ethan said casually. A big one with jets. Thomas might enjoy it. Violet looked at him, understanding the invitation. Ethan, come home with me. His hand found hers on the bench, their fingers intertwining naturally. Both of you, just for tonight. Let me make you dinner, give Thomas that bath, tuck him into a proper bed instead of a playpen. I don't think that's a good idea. Why not? Because she was afraid of wanting too much, too fast, afraid of the intimacy that would come from being in his space, sleeping under his roof, waking up to find him there. We're taking things slowly, she managed. We've already lost 3 years. His thumb stroked over her knuckles. I'm not asking you to move in tomorrow. I'm just asking for one evening. Let me take care of you both. Please. Thomas, oblivious to the tension, finished his ice cream and snuggled against Ethan's side, his eyes drooping with exhaustion. The trust in that simple gesture undid something in Violet's chest. Okay, she whispered. One evening. Ethan's home was exactly what she'd expected. A restored Victorian townhouse in the best part of the city, with high ceilings and original moldings and furniture that probably cost more than she'd earned in the past year. But it was also warm, lived in, with photographs on the mantel and books stacked on every surface. It's beautiful, Violet said, watching Thomas toddle around the living room with wide eyes. It's empty. Ethan set down the bag of Thomas's things they'd collected from her flat. It's been empty since you left. I bought it thinking we'd fill it together, with furniture, with memories, with... He looked at Thomas. With a family. Violet's throat tightened. Ethan, I'm not trying to pressure you, he said quickly. I just want you to know. This house was always meant for you. For us. He made pasta for dinner. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti with homemade sauce that he'd apparently learned to make from his Italian grandmother. Thomas got more sauce on himself than in his mouth, but he declared it the best pasta ever, which made Ethan grin with such pride that Violet had to look away. After dinner came the promised bath. Ethan ran the water, testing the temperature carefully, then added bubble bath that created mountains of foam. Thomas squealed with delight, splashing until both Ethan and Violet were soaked. "I think the bathroom got more of a bath than he did," Ethan observed, wringing out his sweater. "Welcome to parenthood." Violet wrapped Thomas in a fluffy towel, kissing his damp curls. They put Thomas to bed in one of the guest rooms, Ethan reading 3 picture books until their son finally drifted off. Then they stood in the doorway together, watching him sleep. "Thank you," Ethan whispered, "for letting me have this." Violet leaned against him, letting herself take comfort in his solid presence. "You're his father. You should have had it from the beginning. But I didn't. And that's not your fault." His arm came around her waist, holding her close. "We can't change the past, Violet, but we can build a future if you'll let me." She turned in his arms, looking up into his face. The man she'd loved for so long, the father of her child, the person who still made her heart race with just a look. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I." His hand cupped her cheek. "But I'm more scared of losing you again." The space between them seemed to shrink, the air growing heavy with possibility. Ethan's gaze dropped to her lips, and Violet's breath caught. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with want. And Violet, tired of being afraid, tired of denying what she wanted, breathed one word. "Yes." The kiss was everything Violet remembered, and nothing like it at the same time. Ethan's lips found hers with a tenderness that made her tremble, his hands framing her face as if she were something infinitely precious. 3 years of longing poured into that single moment, 3 years of loss and grief and love that had never died. Violet's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, needing to feel his warmth, his solidity, the proof that this was real, that he was real, that they were finally together again. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I've dreamed about kissing you again every single night for 3 years, he whispered, "and it's even better than I remembered." Violet's laugh was shaky. "We shouldn't. Thomas is just in the next room." "I know." But he didn't move away, his hands sliding from her face to her shoulders, down her arms, as if he needed to keep touching her to believe she was there. "I know we need to take this slow. But God, Violet, I've missed you so much. I've missed you too." She looked up at him, seeing the same desperate need in his eyes that she felt. Every day. Every single day. They stood in the hallway outside Thomas's room, holding each other, neither wanting to be the first to let go. Finally, Violet pulled back reluctantly. "I should check on Thomas. He's fine. I can hear him snoring." Ethan smiled, that rare, genuine smile she loved. "Come downstairs, let me make you tea, let's just talk." "Really talk?" In the kitchen, Violet sat at the marble counter, while Ethan moved around with easy familiarity, putting the kettle on, retrieving mugs from a cabinet. It was domestic and intimate, and made her chest ache with how much she wanted this to be her everyday life. "Tell me about him," Ethan said, setting a steaming mug in front of her. "Tell me everything I missed." So she did. She told him about the pregnancy, about being alone and terrified in a strange city when she'd gone into labor, about the moment Thomas had been born, perfect and screaming, with his father's eyes and his mother's stubbornness. "I wanted to call you so badly," she admitted. "When they placed him in my arms for the first time, all I could think was that you should be there, that you deserved to meet your son." Ethan's hand covered hers on the counter. "What stopped you?" "Fear. The same fear that made me leave in the first place." She stared into her tea. "I'd see someone watching me on the street, or a car would drive past too slowly, and I'd panic. I convinced myself they were still monitoring me, waiting for me to make contact with you. They might have been. Margaret Caldwell is nothing if not thorough." His jaw tightened. "But she's done now. I've made sure of it." "How can you be certain?" "Because I've already filed restraining orders against both her and Ruby. Because Helen's testimony is being reviewed by the district attorney. Because my lawyers are preparing a lawsuit that will cost them millions." His eyes were hard. "And because I told Margaret personally that if she or her daughter come anywhere near you or Thomas, I'll use every resource at my disposal to destroy them." Violet shivered at the cold fury in his voice. This was a side of Ethan she'd rarely seen, the ruthless businessman who'd built his family's empire into something even more powerful. "I don't want you to have to fight my battles," she said quietly. "They're not just your battles anymore. They're ours." He squeezed her hand. "We're in this together, Violet. You, me, and Thomas. A family." The word hung between them, weighted with possibility. A family. It was everything she'd wanted, everything she'd thought she'd lost. "Ethan, I need to be honest with you." Violet took a deep breath. "I'm not the same person I was 3 years ago. Being alone, raising Thomas, constantly looking over my shoulder, it changed me. I'm more cautious now, more afraid." "I know. I've changed too." He moved around the counter to stand beside her. "I'm harder now, more suspicious. The man you left was naive enough to think that loving someone was enough to keep them safe. I know better now. I don't want you to be hard because of me." "I'm not." His hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing across her skin. "I'm protective. There's a difference, and I'm going to protect you and Thomas with everything I have." Violet leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. She'd been strong for so long, carrying the weight of her secrets alone. The relief of sharing that burden was almost overwhelming. "Stay tonight," Ethan said softly. "Both of you. I have plenty of guest rooms if you're not ready to, if you need space, but please don't leave. Let me wake up tomorrow knowing you're here, that you're safe." She should say no, should insist on going back to her small flat, on maintaining boundaries. But the truth was she didn't want to leave, didn't want to take Thomas back to that cramped space when he could sleep in a real bed, didn't want to spend another night alone. "Okay," she whispered. "We'll stay." The smile that broke across Ethan's face was like sunrise. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Violet let herself melt into his embrace. For the first time in 3 years, she felt safe, truly, completely safe. They talked for hours, catching up on everything they'd missed. Ethan told her about the business, about the loneliness of the past years, about how his mother had never given up hope that Violet would return. Violet told him about the small towns she'd lived in, about teaching Thomas his letters and numbers, about the restoration work that had kept them fed. Finally, near midnight, exhaustion caught up with them both. Ethan showed Violet to the guest room next to Thomas's, bringing her fresh towels and one of his shirts to sleep in. "If you need anything, anything at all, I'm just across the hall," he said, lingering in the doorway. "Thank you. For everything." "Violet," he paused, his hand on the doorframe. "I meant what I said earlier. I love you. I never stopped loving you. And I'm going to spend every day proving to you that we can make this work." Her heart swelled. "I love you too, Ethan. I always have." The words hung in the air between them, a promise and a beginning. Then Ethan smiled, wished her good night, and closed the door softly behind him. Violet changed into his shirt, the fabric soft and smelling like him. She checked on Thomas one more time, finding him sprawled across the bed, completely at peace. Then she climbed into her own bed, pulled the covers up, and for the first time in 3 years, fell asleep without fear. Violet woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows, and the sound of laughter drifting up from downstairs. For a moment, disoriented, she couldn't remember where she was. Then memory flooded back, Ethan's house, Thomas, the kiss in the hallway. She sat up quickly, grabbing her phone from the nightstand. 7:30, she never slept this late. Thomas was usually awake by 6, demanding breakfast and attention. Pulling on the jeans she'd worn yesterday, she padded downstairs barefoot, following the sounds of giggles and Ethan's deeper voice. The scene in the kitchen stopped her in the doorway. Ethan stood at the stove, spatula in hand, wearing pajama bottoms and a t-shirt that clung to his shoulders in ways that made her mouth go dry. Thomas sat on the counter beside him, a safety violation Violet would normally object to, covered in flour and pointing excitedly at the pan. Flip it, Daddy," Ethan obliged, flipping a pancake with theatrical flair. It landed perfectly, and Thomas clapped his flour-covered hands together, sending white powder everywhere. "We're making a mess," Violet observed from the doorway. Both males turned to look at her, identical guilty expressions on their faces. The resemblance was so strong it made her heart ache. "Mummy!" Thomas reached for her, and Ethan quickly lifted him down from the counter. "We made pancakes. Daddy let me pour." "I can see that." Violet brushed flour from Thomas's curls, then looked at Ethan. "I can't believe you let me sleep so late." "You needed it." He set a plate of perfectly golden pancakes on the table. "Thomas and I have been having man time." "Right, buddy." "Man time," Thomas echoed importantly, puffing out his small chest. Violet couldn't help but laugh. One morning with his father, and Thomas was already imitating his mannerisms. Breakfast was chaotic and wonderful. Thomas insisted on drowning his pancakes in syrup, getting it everywhere. Ethan told terrible dad jokes that made their son laugh, even though he didn't understand them. Violet found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in years, enjoying the simple pleasure of a family meal. After breakfast, while Thomas was absorbed in playing with his trains, Ethan's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. "It's my lawyer," he said, stepping into the hallway. Violet cleaned up the breakfast dishes, trying not to eavesdrop but unable to help overhearing parts of the conversation. Restraining order approved. Yes, both of them. Civil suit moving forward. District attorney interested in criminal charges for fraud and extortion. When Ethan returned, his face was grim but satisfied. "It's official. Ruby and Margaret are legally forbidden from contacting you, me, or Thomas. They've also been dropped from half the charity boards in the city. Apparently, word spread about what they did, and people aren't happy. Ethan, I don't want to ruin anyone's life. They ruined yours first." His voice was hard. "They terrorized you, separated a father from his son and felt no remorse. They deserve every consequence coming to them." Violet understood his anger, but she also knew that vengeance wouldn't heal the wounds of the past 3 years. As long as they can't hurt us anymore, that's what matters. They can't, I promise you that. He pulled her close, and she went willingly, resting her head against his chest. "You're safe now, both of you." The morning passed in comfortable domesticity. Ethan had to make some business calls, so Violet took Thomas to the garden behind the house. It was beautiful, with flowering trees and a small pond where ducks paddled lazily. "Ducks!" Thomas squealed, trying to run toward the water. Violet caught his hand. "We can look, but we have to stay back from the edge." They spent an hour throwing bread to the ducks, Thomas's delighted laughter filling the air. Violet watched her son, thinking about how different his life could be now. Growing up here in this beautiful house with both parents who loved him, with security and stability instead of fear and uncertainty. He looks happy. Violet turned to find Ethan standing behind her, his expression soft as he watched their son. "He is happy. He's always been happy." She smiled. "Children are resilient like that. Even when I was terrified, even when we were living in cramped apartments and I was working 3 jobs, he was happy. You did an amazing job with him." Ethan's arm came around her waist. "But you don't have to do it alone anymore." The words made her eyes sting with tears. She'd been alone for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone share the burden. "What happens now?" she asked. "With us, I mean?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, watching Thomas chase after a duck that waddled just out of reach. "I want you to move in. Both of you. Not because of Thomas, though obviously I want to be with him every day, but because I love you, Violet. Because I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. Because I want to build the life we were meant to have." Violet's heart raced. It was too fast, too soon. They'd only been reunited for 2 days. But hadn't they already wasted 3 years? "I need time," she said finally. "Not because I don't want this, I do, but I need to process everything that's happened. I need to feel stable again." "I understand." He kissed the top of her head. "Take all the time you need, but know that this house is yours whenever you're ready. You and Thomas always have a place here." They stood together in the garden, watching their son play, and Violet felt something shift inside her. The fear that had been her constant companion for 3 years was finally beginning to loosen its grip. Maybe, just maybe, they really could have this. A second chance, a future, a family. That afternoon, Violet's phone rang. Her mother's number flashed on the screen. "Mum? Violet, darling, have you seen the news?" Susan's voice was breathless with excitement. "It's all over the social pages. Ethan Holloway has ended his relationship with Ruby Caldwell, and there are rumors about a lawsuit involving threats and harassment. Is this about you?" Violet glanced at Ethan, who was building a tower with Thomas. "Yes, Mum. It's about me, about us. Ethan knows everything now." "Oh, sweetheart," her mother's voice broke. "Can we see you? Your father and I have been so worried." "Of course. We'll come to you. Maybe this weekend?" She watched Ethan tickle Thomas until the boy shrieked with laughter. "I have someone who wants to meet you, his grandson." Her mother's sob of joy made Violet's own tears fall. Finally, after 3 years of secrets and separation, her family was coming back together. And this time no one would tear them apart. The drive to Violet's parents' house that Saturday was filled with Thomas's excited chatter from the back seat. Ethan drove, one hand on the wheel, the other holding Violet's across the console. Every few minutes he'd glance at her, as if still unable to believe she was really there. "Are you nervous?" Violet asked. "Terrified," he smiled. "Your father never had the chance to threaten me with a shotgun when we were dating. He might take the opportunity now. Dad doesn't own a shotgun. That you know of." Despite the joking, Violet could feel the tension in Ethan's shoulders. He wanted her parents' approval, wanted to prove he could protect their daughter and grandson. She squeezed his hand reassuringly. Susan and Michael Harrington lived in a cottage on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by gardens that Susan tended with obsessive care. The moment Ethan's car pulled into the driveway, the front door burst open. "Violet!" Susan rushed out, her eyes already streaming with tears. Violet barely had time to unbuckle Thomas before her mother was pulling her into a fierce embrace. Michael followed more slowly, his eyes suspiciously bright as he wrapped his arms around both women. "Let me see him," Susan demanded, pulling back to look at Thomas, who was clinging shyly to Violet's leg. "Oh, he's gotten so big. And he looks just like—" She stopped, finally noticing Ethan standing by the car, his hands in his pockets, watching the reunion with an expression Violet couldn't quite read. "Ethan." Susan's voice softened. "You came. Mrs. Harrington. Mr. Harrington." Ethan stepped forward, extending his hand to Michael. "I owe you both an apology. I should have protected Violet better. I should have—" "None of that was your fault," Michael interrupted, shaking Ethan's hand firmly. "We know what happened, what those women did, and we're grateful you found our daughter and brought her home." Susan moved to hug Ethan, and Violet saw him stiffen in surprise before returning the embrace. "Thank you for loving her," Susan whispered, loud enough for Violet to hear, "for never giving up." Inside, over tea and homemade biscuits, Thomas's shyness evaporated. He charmed his grandparents with stories about trains and ducks and Daddy's big house. Susan and Michael hung on every word, 3 years of missed moments written plainly on their faces. "We were so afraid," Susan said later, when Thomas was occupied with the toys they'd saved from Violet's childhood. "Every day not knowing if you were safe, if you had enough to eat, if—" Her voice broke. "I'm sorry," Violet whispered. "I'm so sorry I put you through that. You did what you had to do to survive." Michael's voice was gruff with emotion. "But thank God it's over now." Ethan cleared his throat. "Mr. Harrington, there's something I'd like to discuss with you. Privately, if possible." Violet's heart jumped. The two men disappeared into Michael's study, leaving her alone with her mother and Thomas. "He's going to ask Dad for permission, isn't he?" Violet breathed. Susan's smile was knowing. "What do you think they're talking about in there?" "Mum, it's too soon. We've only been back together for a week. You've loved each other for 4 years. You have a child together. How much more time do you need?" Susan took her daughter's hands. "Don't let fear rob you of happiness again, sweetheart. You've both been through enough." When Ethan and Michael emerged 20 minutes later, both wearing satisfied expressions, Violet's stomach fluttered with nervous anticipation. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Perfect." Ethan's eyes found hers, warm and full of promises. "Everything's perfect." That evening, as they drove back to the city with Thomas asleep in his car seat, Ethan reached for Violet's hand again. "Your father gave me something today," he said quietly. "His blessing, not just to be with you, but to marry you. When you're ready." Violet's breath caught. "Ethan, I'm not proposing. Not yet. I want to do it properly, romantically, when the time is right." He brought her hand to his lips. "But I wanted you to know. I want forever with you, Violet. I want to be your husband, Thomas's father. I want us to be a real family." Tears streamed down Violet's face. "I want that too." "Then we'll make it happen." His voice was fierce with certainty. "Together." As the city lights appeared on the horizon, Violet felt the last pieces of her broken heart finally click back into place. The nightmare was over. The future was beginning, and this time nothing would tear them apart. The restoration of St. Edmund's Chapel was progressing beautifully. Violet spent her days carefully cleaning centuries of grime from delicate glass, revealing colors that hadn't seen sunlight in generations. And every evening, Ethan would arrive to pick her and Thomas up, driving them back to his house, their house, he kept insisting, though Violet hadn't officially moved in yet. It was becoming harder to maintain the pretense of separation. Most of her clothes were now in Ethan's guest room. Thomas's toys were scattered throughout the house. They had family dinners every night, gave Thomas baths together, read bedtime stories as a team. They were living as a family in every way but one. "You're still sleeping in the guest room," Ethan observed one evening after Thomas was in bed. They were curled together on the sofa, Violet tucked against his side, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her shoulder. "I am," Violet agreed, her heart racing at the unspoken question. "Any particular reason?" She tilted her head to look up at him. "I want to be sure. Not of my feelings for you, I've never been more certain of anything. But I want Thomas to understand what's happening. I want us to be solid before we take that step." Ethan's hand cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. "I can wait. I'd wait forever if that's what you needed." His eyes darkened with desire. "Though I won't pretend it's easy, having you so close and yet so far away." Violet's breath hitched. She could feel the heat of his body, the steady thrum of his heartbeat. 3 years of longing pulsed between them, a tension that grew stronger every day. "Kiss me," she whispered. He did, slowly, thoroughly, until she was breathless and trembling. His hands stayed respectful, never wandering, but his mouth promised everything. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I love you," Ethan said against her lips. "God, Violet, I love you so much." "I love you too." She traced his jawline with her fingertips. "Soon, I promise, soon." The following week brought unexpected news. The chapel restoration had attracted attention from the local historical society, and they wanted to host a gala to celebrate its completion. The event would showcase Violet's work, with tours of the restored windows and a formal dinner attended by the city's elite. "It's a huge honor," Mrs. Pemberton gushed. "Your work deserves recognition, dear." Violet was less enthusiastic. "I don't like being in the spotlight." "You won't be alone," Ethan assured her that evening. "I'll be right there with you. And my mother is already planning what dress she's going to wear to show off her future daughter-in-law's talents." "Future daughter-in-law?" Violet's heart skipped. "She's already claimed you." Ethan grinned. "Apparently, she's been planning our wedding since the day I brought you home 3 years ago. She has an entire binder." "That's terrifying." "That's my mother." He pulled her close. "But she's right about one thing. You are going to be my wife." "Eventually." The certainty in his voice made her shiver with anticipation. "Pretty confident, aren't you?" "Completely." His lips found hers again, the kiss deepening until Violet forgot why she'd been protesting. The night of the gala arrived too quickly. Violet stood in Ethan's bedroom, she'd needed the full-length mirror, wearing a deep emerald dress that Adelaide had insisted on buying her. It hugged her curves before flowing to the floor, elegant without being ostentatious. "You look breathtaking," Ethan said from the doorway. Violet turned to find him in a tuxedo, looking devastatingly handsome. Her mouth went dry. "We match," she managed. "My mother planned that too." He crossed to her, his hands settling on her waist. "Are you ready for this?" "No?" She laughed nervously. "I'm terrible at small talk. I'll probably spill something on someone important. Then I'll make sure you're never without a drink in your hand, so you can't possibly spill it." He kissed her forehead. "You're going to be amazing, and I'm going to be so proud to stand beside you while everyone admires your work." Mrs. Fletcher arrived to watch Thomas, who was already in his pajamas and excited about the sleepover with his favorite babysitter. Violet kissed him goodnight, then let Ethan lead her to the car. The chapel looked magical, lit up against the night sky. Inside, the restored windows glowed like jewels, casting rainbow light across the stone floors. Violet's breath caught at the sight of her work displayed so beautifully. "See?" Ethan whispered in her ear. "Breathtaking. Just like you." The evening passed in a blur of introductions and compliments. Violet found herself relaxing as people genuinely appreciated her work, asking intelligent questions about techniques and materials. Ethan stayed close, his presence a steady comfort. Near the end of the evening, he took her hand and led her to the front of the chapel, where the largest window, the one she'd spent months restoring, caught the light from outside. "There's something I need to say," Ethan began, his voice carrying in the quiet space. And Violet realized, with a jolt of surprise and joy, that this was it. This was the moment. Everything changed. The chapel had grown quiet, guests sensing something important was about to happen. Violet's heart hammered as Ethan took both her hands in his grey eyes locked on hers. "3 years ago, I lost the woman I loved," he began, his voice carrying through the sacred space. "She disappeared without a trace, and I spent every day since searching for her, trying to understand what had happened. I hired investigators. I contacted every authority I could find. And when I finally had to accept that she was gone, I tried to move on with my life. Violet's eyes filled with tears, aware of the crowd watching but unable to look away from Ethan's face. "But I failed," he continued, "because you can't move on from the person who holds your heart. You can't forget the woman who makes you whole. And when she came back into my life, when I found her here in this chapel, creating something beautiful just like she always did, I realized I'd been given a second chance." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, and Violet's breath caught as he pulled out a small velvet box. "Violet Harrington, you gave me the greatest gift I could ever receive, our son, Thomas. You survived 3 years alone because someone threatened the people you loved. You showed courage I can't even comprehend, and through it all you never stopped being the brilliant, compassionate, extraordinary woman I fell in love with." Ethan dropped to one knee, and gasps rippled through the crowd. Violet's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming freely now. "I should have protected you better. I should have been there when Thomas was born, for his first steps, his first words. I can't get that time back, but I can promise you this. I will spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you and Thomas are safe, loved, and cherished. I will be the husband you deserve, and the father our son needs." He opened the box, revealing a ring that caught the colored light from the windows. A sapphire surrounded by diamonds, the deep blue reminiscent of the stained glass she loved. "Marry me, Violet. Not because of Thomas, though I want us to be a family, but because I love you. Because I've loved you since the moment you explained the symbolism in a medieval rose window with such passion that I forgot we'd just met. Because I'll love you until my last breath and beyond." The chapel was utterly silent. Violet looked at the man kneeling before her, at the hope and love and vulnerability in his eyes. She thought about the 3 years they'd lost, the pain they'd endured, the obstacles they'd overcome. And she thought about the future, waking up beside him every morning, raising Thomas together, growing old in each other's arms. "Yes." Her voice broke on the word. "Yes, Ethan. 1,000 times, yes." The ring slipped onto her finger perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Ethan stood, pulling her into his arms, and kissed her with a passion that made her forget the watching crowd, forget everything except the feel of his lips on hers, the strength of his arms around her, the rightness of finally being his. Applause erupted through the chapel, but Violet barely heard it. She was lost in Ethan, in the kiss that tasted of salt and joy and promises kept. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and laughing through their tears, Adelaide was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Violet's parents had appeared in the crowd, her mother sobbing happily into her father's shoulder. "I love you," Ethan whispered against her hair. "My brilliant, beautiful wife-to-be." "I love you too." Violet looked up at him, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Thank you for never giving up on us." "Never." He kissed her again, softer this time but no less meaningful. "I'll never give up on us." The celebration continued around them, but Violet and Ethan remained in their own world, holding each other in the chapel where everything had begun again. The colored light from the restored windows painted them in shades of hope and new beginnings, blessing the love that had survived separation, threats, and time itself. Tomorrow they would start planning their future, but tonight, surrounded by beauty and love and the promise of forever, they simply held each other and let themselves be happy. 3 months after the proposal, Violet stood in front of the mirror in Adelaide's bedroom, smoothing the ivory silk of her wedding dress. It was simpler than Adelaide had wanted. No train, no veil, just a fitted bodice and flowing skirt that made Violet feel like herself rather than playing dress-up. "You're stunning," Susan said from behind her, her voice thick with emotion. "Your father is going to cry when he sees you." "He's already cried twice this morning." Violet laughed, blinking back her own tears. "I can't believe this is really happening." "Believe it, darling." Adelaide appeared in the doorway, elegant in champagne silk. "My son has been counting down the days like a child waiting for his birthday." The wedding was small, just family and close friends gathered in the chapel where everything had changed. Thomas served as ring-bearer, taking his job with utmost seriousness, though he did try to eat one of the rings before Ethan gently redirected him. When Violet walked down the aisle on her father's arm, Ethan's expression made her heart stop. Love, wonder, and barely contained emotion played across his features. His eyes never left her face. "You're here," he whispered when she reached him, as if he still couldn't quite believe it. "I'm here," she confirmed, and I'm never leaving again." The ceremony was beautiful and brief. They'd written their own vows, promising love, honesty, and partnership. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with such tenderness that several guests openly wept. The reception was held in the garden of Ethan's house, their house now officially. Violet had moved in the week before, finally allowing herself to believe in permanence. Thomas ran through the flowers with other children, while adults danced under strings of lights that turned the garden magical. "Happy?" Ethan asked, pulling her close for a slow dance. Deliriously. Violet rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Though I keep waiting to wake up and find this is all a dream." "Not a dream. A promise." He kissed the top of her head. "You're stuck with me now, Mrs. Holloway." Mrs. Holloway. The name sent shivers of joy through her. As evening fell, guests began to depart. Susan and Michael took Thomas home with them for the weekend, his first adventure at Grandma and Grandpa's house that he'd been excited about for days. Finally, Violet and Ethan were alone. They stood in the garden, the fairy lights casting soft shadows, neither quite ready to move toward what came next. "Are you nervous?" Ethan asked softly. Violet looked up at him, this man who'd waited for her, who'd fought for her, who'd loved her through everything. "A little. It's been so long, and we have all the time in the world." His hand cupped her cheek. "We don't have to." "I want to." She rose on her toes to kiss him. "I want you. I've wanted you for so long." He swept her into his arms, carrying her through the house and up the stairs to their bedroom, not the guest room she'd been using, but the master suite they would now share. He set her down gently, his hands trembling slightly as they found the zipper of her dress. "Tell me if you want to stop," he murmured against her neck. "Tell me if it's too much." But it wasn't too much. It was perfect. They undressed each other slowly, savoring every moment, every touch, every whispered word of love. When they finally came together, it was with a tenderness that brought tears to Violet's eyes. This wasn't just physical. It was a reunion of souls that had been separated too long. Ethan held her afterward, both of them trembling and breathless, their hearts beating in sync. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "My wife. My Violet. I love you too." She pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. "My husband. My everything." They made love again, slower this time, learning each other anew. And when they finally fell asleep, tangled together in the sheets, Violet felt a peace she'd never known, the peace of being exactly where she belonged. 6 months later, the golden afternoon sun streamed through the restored stained glass windows of St. Edmund's Chapel, painting the floor in pools of crimson, sapphire, and amber. Violet sat in one of the side pews, Thomas asleep in her lap, his dark curls mussed, his face peaceful as only sleeping children can be. Ethan approached silently, his footsteps soft on the ancient stones. He sat beside them, wrapping one arm around Violet's shoulders, the other resting protectively over Thomas. Life hadn't returned to what it was before. It had become something better, something real and solid, built on truth instead of secrets. On weekends they walked the old streets, bought ice cream in the square, taught Thomas to ride his first tricycle along the cobblestone paths where their story had begun. Violet continued her restoration work, passion reignited in every project. Ethan had learned to leave the office early, to prioritize moments over meetings. That afternoon, surrounded by colored light and promises fulfilled, Ethan whispered close to her ear, "Are you ready for the next chapter?" Violet smiled, kissed Thomas's forehead, then turned to her husband. "It's already begun." And there, between ancient stones and rainbow light, their love found its forever home. Leave your comment and share this story with someone special. It truly helps us keep bringing new stories to you. And if you want to follow every chapter of this emotional journey, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Your support makes all the difference.